There are places in the world where even darkness is feared. Capri, a beautiful island in the middle of the Bay of Naples, is one of them. Have you ever wondered why the most beautiful places often hide the darkest secrets? In 27 AD, when Emperor Tiberius, heir to the throne of Augustus, decided to leave Rome to retire on the island of Capri, no one could have imagined that his decision would turn the idyllic island into a prison for tormented souls. A prison without bars, surrounded by only seawater and steep cliffs, where cries for help would be lost in the howling wind. Tiberius was no ordinary emperor. He did not love power like Caesar, nor did he crave conquest like Alexander, nor did he crave building like Augustus. Tiberius craved something else, something that even ancient historians could only whisper in the dark. He craved absolute control over human fear. Tacitus once wrote, "Tiberius had the power to read men's souls as if they were open books." But what the great historian failed to say was that Tiberius could not only read souls, he could also break them. On the island of Capri, far from the prying eyes of Rome, Tiberius began building not a palace, but a laboratory to study the limits of human cruelty. The 12 villas built across the island, were not for relaxation, but for experiments that even hell would envy. But perhaps the most terrifying thing is not what Tiberius did, but why he did it. Because behind the cold exterior of a brutal emperor, there was a man haunted by a single fear, the fear of being forgotten, and so that he would never be forgotten, Tiberius decided to carve his name into history with blood and tears. He understood that love may fade, respect may disappear, but horror will last forever. When the first ships arrived on Capri carrying the emperor's guests, none of them knew that they would never leave the island again, at least not in human form. Do you believe in intuition? The ancient Romans believed that when a person stepped on a cursed piece of land, their soul would immediately sense it. And on the port of Capri, where the stone steps led up to Tiberius's palace, there was a strange thing that historians never mentioned. Not a single seabird dared to land there. Marcus Sejanus, Tiberius's closest friend and soon-to-be first victim, once described stepping onto Capri as entering the mouth of a sleeping monster. This was not a poetic metaphor. It was a warning. Tiberius had prepared Capri as an arena, but not for battles with swords and shields. He had prepared it for battles with human souls. Villa Jovis, the main castle located on the highest point of the island, was designed like a funnel. All paths led to a single room, what Tiberius called the Theatrum Mortis, the theatre of death. But before we talk about the room, we need to understand the actors in this terrible play. They were not criminals or slaves as you might think. They were Roman nobles, senators, women from the most prestigious families. Tiberius did not want to hurt unknown people. He wanted to hurt people whose names were known throughout the empire. Lucius Aruntius, the former governor of Syria who had trusted Tiberius as a brother, was one of the first to receive the invitation to Capri. In a letter to his wife before his departure, he wrote, "My dear, if I do not send you a letter within 2 months, consider me dead, and do not look for my body." Why would a man as strong as Aruntius write such desperate words? Because he knew something we can only guess today. Tiberius did not simply kill people. He destroyed them from the inside, piece by piece, until they begged for death, and Villa Damacuta, the second villa on the west side of the island, was where Tiberius perfected his art of psychoanatomy. Here, parties were not about eating, but about observing, watching when a person would break. There is one detail that Suetonius, the only historian who dared to record a part of the truth about Capri, only dared to mention metaphorically. The emperor liked to hold parties under the full moon, because he believed that the light of day would fade the true red of blood. You might think this is just a rumor, But what have modern archaeologists discovered in the basement of Villa Jovis? Intricately carved stone channels leading from the center of the room to the sea. These channels were not designed to drain rainwater. They were designed to drain something else, something thicker, redder. Marcus Lepidus, son of the famous general of the same name, is the only surviving witness to a banquet he calls the Symposium Sanguinis, blood conference. In a letter found in the 18th century, hidden in the wall of a house in Pompeii, Lepidus writes, "I was invited as an honored guest, but when I entered the banquet hall, I realized I was not a guest, I was an audience. There was no food on the table, only silver cups and a question. Are you willing to drink to prove your loyalty?" Lepidus never revealed what he drank from, the cup, but he lost the ability to sleep for the rest of his life. Every night, he heard the cries of those who had not refused the cup. Tiberius understood something other emperors did not. True power does not lie in the ability to order people to do things. True power lies in the ability to make people willingly do what they hate most. And in his bloody feasts, Tiberius mastered this art. Villa San Michele, which today is a peaceful museum, was in Tiberius's time the Laboratorium Animae, the laboratory of the soul. Here, the emperor did not torture the body, he tortured the consciousness. The visitors were divided into two groups, those who had to watch and those who had to do. And the cruelest thing was that after a while, no one could tell which group they belonged to. Julia Livilla, granddaughter of Tiberius and one of the most intelligent women of her time, left an inscription carved on a rock near the shore. Monsters are not those who kill. Monsters are those who turn others into murderers. And as the moonlight fell on the cliffs of Capri, and the sound of the waves could not hide the sound of weeping, Tiberius sat on his stone throne, smiling softly. For he knew that every drop of blood that fell on the stone floor was not just a death. It was a work of art. But to understand the monster, one must understand the man who created it. Tiberius Claudius Nero, the emperor's full name, was not born to rule. He was born to observe. And in an empire where every move could be a sign of treachery, the ability to read minds became a curse. Livia Drusilla, Tiberius's stepmother, and perhaps the most powerful woman in Roman history, once said something only those closest to her knew. "My son can see through people's souls, but that is killing his own soul." How did a man with the ability to read people become history's most brutal torturer? The answer lies in a detail that even Tacitus dared to record only in code. Tiberius did not torture people because he hated them. He tortured them because he understood them too well. In a private room at Villa Jovis, archaeologists found a wall covered with tiny inscriptions. After years of deciphering them, they realized they were psychological maps, detailed analyses of each victim's weaknesses. Tiberius did not act on emotion, he acted on science. Gaius Asinius Gallus, a senator who had dared to confront Tiberius in the Senate, recounted the experience of facing the emperor. "When he looked at me, I felt as if I were being stripped, not of body, but of soul. He knew thoughts that I had never dared to admit to myself. But there was one secret Tiberius hid better than all his crimes. He was afraid. So afraid that he turned his fear into the fear of others." In private letters discovered in the 20th century, Tiberius confessed, "I see falsehood in every smile, betrayal in every embrace, death in every birthday greeting. So why should I wait?" Villa Palazzo Amare, the seaside villa where Tiberius spent his final hours, was built as a fortress against loneliness. 12 floors. Each floor had only one room. Each room had only one window facing the sea. Servants recounted that on his last nights, Tiberius would often stand by the window, talking to someone. But he was alone in the room. "Are you satisfied?" This was the question the servants often heard the emperor mutter. To whom was he speaking? To his victims? Or to the demons in his head? And perhaps this is the most terrifying truth about Tiberius. He was not a brutal man born to kill. He was a haunted genius who turned his ability to understand people into the most destructive weapon in history. Have you ever wondered why some crimes are called systematic? On the island of Capri, Tiberius created not just a place of torture, but a perfect machine that turned men into beasts and beasts into monsters. Macro, the only captain of the guard allowed to stay on Capri for 11 years, left behind a coded diary that was discovered in the 19th century. In it, he describes the process that Tiberius called progressus mortis, the process of death. Day 1. Guests were treated like royalty. They ate lavishly and stayed comfortably. Tiberius appeared as the perfect host. Day 3. Start the questions. No hard interrogation, just friendly conversations about family, about little secrets. Saturday. The victims realized they could not leave. The ships were gone. Communications with Rome were cut off. Panic set in. Day 10. Tiberius showed them what he knew. Every secret, every sin, every fear. Their psyches completely broken. Day 15. The first offer. Do this for me, and you will. Be free. That always involves harming another person. Those who refuse usually do not live past day 20. Those who agree discover that this is only the first step in a series of increasingly brutal demands. Villa Gradola, a secret villa, built entirely underground, is where the final stages of progressus mortis take place. Here, Tiberius is no longer observing. He is participating. Quintus Junius Blaesus, the former governor of Africa and the last man who dared to write a letter of protest to Tiberius, described the final room of Villa Gradola as the very heart of hell. The 4 walls were mirrors, as was the ceiling. Victims were forced to see themselves from every angle as they performed the tasks Tiberius demanded. He didn't want me to forget my face, Blaesus wrote in his final words before committing suicide. He wanted me to remember the face of the one who betrayed me. But perhaps the most chilling detail of Tiberius's system was the fact that he kept notes, not for bragging, but for study. In his personal library at the Villa San Michele, archaeologists have found hundreds of parchment scrolls detailing the reactions of each victim, the time they broke, the way they begged, the last words they spoke. Tiberius viewed each human being as a scientific experiment, and like all scientists, he was always looking for ways to improve his methods. Thrasilla, Tiberius's personal astrologer, and perhaps the person who knew him best, once confessed to a student, "The emperor does not torture out of cruelty. He tortures because he wants to understand." He believes that only by pushing people to their absolute limits can one see their true nature. And as the sun set behind the cliffs of Capri, as darkness enveloped the island, Tiberius's soft laughter echoed through the corridors. For he knew that tomorrow morning the experiment would continue, and there would always be new victims to study. There are names that history tries to erase, but the blood that has been shed will never dry. Among Tiberius's victims on Capri was a woman whom even the emperor had to admit he had broken wrong, Agrippina Majore, Augustus's daughter-in-law and future mother of the Emperor Caligula. Agrippina did not come to Capri as a prisoner. She came as a challenge. In a letter to Tiberius before her departure, she wrote, "Do you want to know if it is possible to break the spirit of a woman Germanicus? Try it." The Villa Imperiale, a private royal villa, became the most luxurious prison in history. Tiberius tortured Agrippina not with physical pain. He tortured her with alternating hope and despair. Every day she was told that one of her sons was dead. The next day they were alive, then dead again, then alive again. For 3 years, Agrippina lived in a state of uncertainty about what was true and what was false. Servants recounted that she often stood at her window, counting the ships from Rome, wondering if there would be any news of her children. Each ship brought a hope, and each hope was crushed. But Agrippina Majore did not snap. Instead, she did, something that Tiberius did not expect. She began to laugh. Not a hysterical laugh, but a knowing laugh. She understood the game and decided not to play anymore. "You can kill me," she told Macro in their last recorded meeting. "But you can no longer make me afraid. And an enemy without fear is the most dangerous enemy." Tiberius ordered Agrippina to fast. Not because he wanted to brutally kill her, but because he was afraid. Afraid that if he let her live, she would become a symbol of indomitability that he could not destroy. But Agrippina's death marked the beginning of something Tiberius had not anticipated. The victims began to fight back, not with force, but with memory. Marcus Scribonius Libo Drusus, a young senator who had been invited to Capri by Tiberius, escaped by faking his own death. Over the next 20 years, he traveled the empire, recounting what he had seen. His stories became urban legend, then rumor, then undeniable truth. "The emperor can kill the body," Libo Drusus used to say at the end of his secret speeches, "but he cannot kill the memory. And the memory is what will judge him." Cassius Chaerea, the young officer who witnessed Agrippina's death, later became Caligula's assassin. When asked why he killed the emperor, he simply said, "Because I have seen what happens when a Roman emperor lives too long on an island." And in his final nights, as Tiberius walked the deserted corridors of Villa Jovis, he began to hear Agrippina's voice. Not a cry of supplication, but a laugh. The laugh of a woman who had triumphed even in death. There is one law that even the most powerful emperors cannot change: time. And time has begun to punish Tiberius with the thing he fears most: absolute loneliness. In 36 AD, after 9 years of reign on Capri, 77-year-old Tiberius awoke to a horrifying realization. He had become a prisoner on his own island. No one dared to visit him anymore, no more guests to study. Even his most loyal executioners began to look for ways to escape. Macro, the only remaining companion, wrote in his last diary entries, "The emperor no longer speaks to anyone. He just sits by the window, looking out at the sea, and counts. Counting what? I don't know. Perhaps counting dead souls. Perhaps counting the remaining days. Villa Jovis, once a majestic palace, is now a mausoleum for the living. Its vast rooms echo with the sound of lonely footsteps. The gold and silver statues have begun to tarnish. Even the flowers dare not bloom on Capri. But the most terrifying thing was not the loneliness, but the truth that Tiberius began to face. Everything he had done was meaningless. His victims were dead, but their memories lived on. Rome existed without him. The world turned on, regardless of his experiments. Caligula, the only surviving grandson and heir to the throne, visited Capri during Tiberius's final days. The final meeting between grandfather and grandson was recorded by Seneca as a dialogue between the old devil and the young devil. "I have taught you everything," Tiberius told Caligula. "You will become a great emperor." But Caligula just laughed, coldly. "You taught me that power has no limits, but you forgot one thing: power has no meaning." On the night of March 16th, 37, Tiberius died in his sleep. No one was by his side. No last words were left. Only the sound of the waves crashing against the cliffs seemed to applaud his passing. But Tiberius's death was not the end. It was only the beginning of a curse he had created. Caligula, raised in the brutal air of Capri, became an emperor even more insane than his grandfather. Nero, born of blood tainted by the poison of Capri, burned Rome to the ground. And today, as you stand on the cliffs of Capri, looking down at the blue water, you can still sense something. Not beauty, not peace, but the whispers of souls not yet released. The stones still bleed. The waves still weep. And on full moon nights, one can still hear the faint laughter of a dead emperor who believes he has created a masterpiece of art, through human suffering. Tiberius is dead, but Capri, the island of blood feasts, is still there, waiting for someone brave enough to discover the last secrets it holds.